But we've still got people registering it for it as we're starting. That's fine. Yeah, we might as well get started. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. The way this is going to work is as we go through this evening, if you have questions that you wish to ask Melissa or Hayden, if you can put them into the chat function, as your system has all been muted, and I will ask the questions for you. They are happy to answer questions as they go, so feel free to just fire them away and I'll try and keep up with them. But first of all, welcome Melissa and Hayden. Thank you guys so much for agreeing to take part in this tonight, and hopefully we might be able to help people understand the new Fertility BV a little bit better. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and then we'll get underway.
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. Yep, so I'm Hayden Lawrence. So my wife and I farm 400 cows in South Taranaki. Split calving, so 2/3 spring, 1/3 autumn, all AI, so 9 to 10 weeks in the spring and just a short 4-week mating. In the autumn, I guess I've become involved with the Fertility BV through my work with FAP, so the Farmer Advisory Panel on NZAEL, and also last year I was part of the National Breeding Objective panel that helped to set the direction for BW and breeding values going forward. So a little bit of involvement there, and yeah, learned a lot, and probably the one thing was the people involved in that, the drive that they had to listen to everyone's views and try and move forward in a positive direction as well. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. And yeah, I'm Melissa. I've been with Dairy NZ for nearly 10 years now. And I started off, and I was with CRV and Breed before that. And so with my first role in Dairy NZ was communications focused. So working with farmers around how to use breeding values to get the best out of their herds. And then since then I've sort of moved sideways a bit into the science area. So I've done my master's and PhD during that time. And my PhD's focus was fertility, so it's pretty close to my heart. And I was involved, last year and in the lead up to these fertility changes to the fertility breeding value. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. So Melissa, you're going to start with explaining to everybody what the changes are and how that shows through. So do you want to go through with that? Hopefully everyone can see the slides on the screen. Please let me know if you can't.
Yeah, okay, so I'll proceed as if you can, but let us know. So I've got a presentation here just to cover a little bit about the sort of basics of a fertility breeding value or a breeding value in general, and then what our motivations were for trying to improve the fertility breeding value last year, and then going through that change in some more detail, and then the validation work that we did to establish that it was a better prediction of a cow's genetic merit for fertility. So, yeah, cool. Okay, so that should have changed, Amelia. Can you see that?
Huh. No, it's still on the. Yeah, now I can see it.
Oh yeah, it must just be a bit of a delay. So anyway, yeah. I'll let me know if it gets frozen. So this is just a reminder about how breeding value is calculated. So we have the bull in the centre, and that's the animal that we're interested in this case, although we also are sometimes interested in cows, of course. A bull in the first instance gets its breeding values from its mother and father. So it'll be the average of its parents, essentially. And this is parking genomics at first. So it'll be the average of its parents, and that's the best guess we can have, or best estimate we can have about the bull's genetic merit. And then as the bull gets older, we systematically produce daughters for that bull, like in a project testing kind of scheme. And we measure the daughter's performance, and that information starts to flow back to the bull. And so what we're interested in estimating with the breeding value is the animal's ability to breed progeny who have certain traits. And so it's the progeny that give us the best information about bulls, the genetics that a bull can pass on. And so when a bull becomes proven, well, its first proof, that's when it's got 80 to 100 herd tested daughters. And then from there, it'll have also half siblings. So and as it gets older, it will get another crop of daughters, because once they go through project testing first, and then they get widely used in the industry after that. So they get these two sort of like very distinctive crops of daughters. And then if they are a very good bull, they go on to have granddaughters and grandsons, and become the father of bulls. And so then if we bring in genomics as another piece to this, when we go back to when a bull doesn't have any daughter information in his own right, he's got a sire and dam, we can also look at his genomics, his DNA, and make some better predictions about his genetic merit based on what we see in his DNA. And we do that by sort of comparing him to what we call a reference population. So we have this group of bulls where we know their DNA and we know their daughter performance, and we pick up patterns in that. So we see, like, whenever we see this specific bit of DNA, we see this daughter performance. And so it's essentially picking up those patterns and then using them to predict the performance of a bull who we only know their DNA. We don't have any daughter performance information. So genomics helps us out there, sort of it augments the pedigree stuff and makes those predictions more accurate. So back to the fertility breeding value specifically, this is a piece of our breeding worth index. So we produce breeding values for a wide range of traits. I think it's something like 28 traits or something, if you include all the TOP traits as well. And then some of those traits are pulled out as being immediately relevant to a farmer's profit. And so those traits are then included into breeding worth, and we essentially multiply them by their value, and we get a contribution to breeding worth. And the weighting of each trait within breeding worth is directly associated with its relative value to a farmer. So if a trait has more value to a farmer than another trait, it'll have a higher weighting in breeding worth. And those values are produced using a detailed model to try and pull apart the value of each different trait, because obviously a lot of them are pretty intertangled. And so this is just a chart that illustrates the relative value of fertility in the breeding worth index. So it's sort of separated by colours, looking at what we would call production efficiency traits, like their ability to produce per kilo of live weight that they have. And then the green part of it is what we call robustness traits. So their ability to live long in the herd is kind of determined by those traits. And just to break down the acronyms there, it's body condition score, functional survival, somatic cell, and gestation length. And so fertility's got a weighting of around 12.5% in that breeding worth index. Right. So moving on to the development of the fertility trait. So up until last year, the target trait that we were breeding for when it came to the fertility breeding value was calving rate in second lactation. So we used the cow calves every year in New Zealand, and we have the calving date from her heifer calving, and that does give us some information, but it's a time when they're not really under a lot of pressure. So during the mating period, they were not milking, and so most of them getting calf. And then when they're calving, and so that the calving is a reflection of their mating success. And so there's not a lot of variation in that trait, although it is some information. It's not the most informative. And so we use calving in second lactation because during that mating period, during the mating period of first lactation, they're under a lot of pressure, and that really separates the best from the worst. And so we get a lot of variation in that second lactation calving trait. The problem with that trait is that it is a combination of both the the conception date of the animal and the gestation length of the fetus. And so both of those things are important, and they have a value to the farmer, because if a cow calves early because she's carrying a short gestation length calf, which she has influence over, because it's half her genetics. So if she's able to produce a short gestation length calf, I should say, then she'll have a few extra days to recover before the next mating period. So she is more likely to be successful in the next mating period, and also she'll have more days of milk because she's going to calf a few days earlier than another cow who's carrying a longer gestation length calf. So there is value to that piece, but it's different to the piece which is the cow recovers from calving, gets back in, and everything happens biologically as it should within her reproductive system, and she's able to get back in calf early in the mating period. So those two pieces are quite different, and they should be measured and monitored and we think weighted differently in breeding worth. The other complication is that gestation length has a much higher heritability than the what I call the other components of fertility. So we have, for gestation length, the heritability is sort of around, I think, 55 or 60% compared to the other piece of fertility, which is much harder to nail down, and that sort of sits less than 5%. So if they're all sort of mashed into the same trait, then you kind of end up selecting for gestation length inadvertently, and you can sort of leave the other piece behind. So what we want to do is make progress in both of them, and so we need to make sure that we're measuring them separately. So that was the motivation behind the work that we were doing last year. Are there any questions popping up, Amelia? No. Okay, good. Right. So the change we made was to move the phenotype of the fertility breeding value from calving and second lactation to pregnancy and first lactation. So it's still the same mating period, like the mating period in first lactation determines their calving and second lactation and their pregnancy and first lactation, but it's removing that effective gestation length from the trait. And we still include, I've written CST0, which is a bit confusing, but we still include heifer calving, which is CST0, as a predictive trait. And so that the heifer calving trait, it still has a component of gestation length in it, because it's a calving trait, but we often don't have mating records for young heifers, and so we aren't able to determine their conception date. So if we didn't include calving date for those heifers, we would be losing some information from the system. And so the decision was made that it was more worthwhile to include it, even though there would be a piece of gestation length sneaking in through that predictor. So that was the major change. And at the same time, we introduced, we sort of took the opportunity to introduce some new filters into the way that we produce the phenotype extract. So when I say filters, I mean we get within the national database, we store all of the information that a farmer records, every farmer in the country. And then when it comes to animal evaluation, we apply a range of filters to clean it up, essentially saying, these data don't look trustworthy for some reason, and so they should be removed from the evaluation. Or there's something systematic that's happened to that cow, which means that she should not be included in the evaluation. And so as we go, like through the years, there'll be different things that crop up that need filters. And for example, embryo work is one of them, where it's, probably 20 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, probably quite rare, but in 20 years' time, it'll probably be very common. So that's something that we've introduced a filter for in this change, and probably going forward, we'll have to keep reevaluating how we handle that kind of thing. We also introduced some new penalties. So trying to do a better job of picking up cows that have performed poorly because of fertility reasons, where previously they might have just snuck through as the data anomaly. We want to put in a net to catch them, and then make sure they get penalised appropriately for not calving at the right time, or not getting pregnant at the right time. And then the last point there is just validation and the changes we saw. So I've just got a few slides on why we on the work we did to show that the breeding value is better now, better predictor of fertility. Right. So yeah. So to explain the phenotype, so we've got calving as a 2-year-old, and that's a predictor trait in the model. And then we've got calving as a 3-year-old, commencing their second lactation. And this this calving used to be the target trait, and so now instead of that, we're moving from that calving date to the pregnancy trait instead. So if you think so we still have to wait for the calving date because we need the calving date to back calculate the conception date. So we essentially wait for the cow to calve, and then we look back and an appropriate gestation length based on her genetic merit for gestation length and also an average gestation length. And then we look for a mating that would have occurred around that time that would be her conception date. And so it's a back calculation. Going forward, we want that to be determined by pregnancy testing, because we would get that information a lot earlier if we tested, somewhere in here to say is she pregnant or not, and then date it to the right mating. Then it would give us early information, which is really important for the fertility trait in particular. And so that's an improvement that will hopefully come in the future. But right now we don't get a timing advantage. We still have to wait for the 3-year-old calving, but then we use that calving to back calculate the conception date. Right, so on the penalties, so we've introduced penalties for fertility culls. So if an animal is culls in the current season and the cull is recorded as a fertility cull, then she'll be penalised as if she didn't get in calf, basically. She failed to conceive, I should say, because now it's conception date. And so that's a really useful penalty, and it also means that culling information, which some people are really good at entering, actually adds value to the evaluation now. Carryover cows. So if we have a cow that's a carryover, so she's mated and then she fails to calve and then she's mated again, we have date ranges in there to pick up those cows, and then they'll, instead of being essentially ignored, the fact that they were carried over, now they'll receive a calving penalty for the calving that they missed. And so, a calf for the calving that they missed, and then from then on, their fertility records are set to missing. So if that carryover event essentially resets them to say they were getting, later and later in the calving period until the point they didn't get in calf, what can happen is that then they skip a lactation, and they come back in the following lactation with an early calving date. And so previously they would have got rewarded for that because they would be then calving early in the calving period. But in actual fact, the reason why they succeeded is because they had the benefit of being carried over a season. And so now those carryover cows get penalised in the first conception that they miss, and then they are set to missing as if they were. So then they're sort of they don't get any more reward or penalty after that. They're gone from the fertility extract. And then abnormal births. Oh yeah,
Melissa, question regarding that one. So what about if the cow had a hard calving and had damage? She doesn't get in calf, but she is penalised for not being pregnant. Is that taken into account in any way or not?
No, I don't think so. So I think at the moment, if she had a hard calving, I don't think there's any way of accounting for that in the phenotype, and so it would just be it would just be recorded as a calving, and then she would fail to get in calf. So I think she would just be this penalty would apply. And then abnormal births. So this applies to 2-year-old calvings only. So if they have an abortion, which will be late in their gestation, then they will be penalised as a penalty calving rather than rewarded as an early calving. Right, and then so new filters. So these are the filters we apply. So instead of sort of allowing cows to either be rewarded or penalised in kind of an unfair way, we try and catch them before they go into AE. And so there's pros and cons to this, because it can mean that, you know, cows that that were performing really well, their phenotypes then from that point forward don't go into AE, so their breeding values are no longer like updated with their own performance. But if there's a reason that we believe that they are either performing better than they should because of some treatment, or worse than they should because of some treatment, then it makes sense to it's safer for the evaluation to set them to missing rather than let their phenotype their performance affect their sire, who's the one that we're really trying to evaluate accurately. And so this, the new filter that probably the biggest new filter we've put in is for ET heifers and cows. And so if a cow is involved in ET at all, so if they're a recipient or if they're a donor, then that event is not attributed to them. And from that point forward, their fertility records don't go into AE. So this is quite a positive thing for elite cows, because it means that if they sort of mucked around a bit with ET and it upsets their fertility records, they won't get penalised for that. And it's fair because, you know, it's a management intervention which has very little to do with their ability to get in calf. Non-fertility culls before plain-started mating. So if we have a cull reason and an animal's culled before the mating period starts, then she obviously won't be mated because she's not there anymore. But we know that she was dead first, you know, so she couldn't have been mated, so we won't penalise her for not being mated. So it means that instead of that animal's, you know, mating performance reflecting poorly on her sire, it won't. It'll just go through as being a non-fertility related cull that had nothing to do with her fertility. And then unusually long calving intervals. So if there's something that that looks quite out of kilter for a normal calving interval, and we can't classify it as a carryover, then we will just set it to missing. So rather than let that unusual data affect the evaluation, we're better off to set it to missing.
So just a couple of questions that have come through for you there, Melissa.
Yep.
So can you just go into a bit more detail about the ET work? So Dan asked, how will the filter identify ET work? For example, if he decided to do work, if he decided he wanted to flush a cow for a year, is that going to penalise her, or why is she not penalised?
So as soon as she has an event recorded against her which is coded as ET, then she'll be set to missing from the evaluation. So it won't penalise her at all, apart from the fact that no more of her fertility records will contribute to the fertility evaluation.
Okay. When will scanning results of pregnancies be used in the fertility BV?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're hoping to get them in. Well, you know, as soon as we can is kind of the answer. We have some work to do around agreements with the herd recording companies to get the data into DIGAD and be able to use it for the purpose of AE. And so, but that, yeah, those are probably not far away. And then once that's sorted out, then we will, we have to go through the process of, you know, using that data to produce a phenotype. So that might take some time, some development time, but I don't know, 2 years probably would be my estimate.
Melissa, do you just want to comment as well, obviously with that scanning data, with new technologies, especially around, I guess, pregnancy testing and milk testing, wearables, are we going to see as much scanning in the future, or are we going to see a rapid decline in scanning? And has Dairy NZ sort of thought about that going forward?
Yeah, there is kind of a risk of that, where we put a lot of work into developing a method for dealing with that pregnancy diagnosis data, and then it gets superseded, you know, within 5 years with collar data or whatever it is that comes along. So yeah, I just think we need to keep our eye on it, and the solution we come up with producing a pregnancy date for the cows hopefully it's going to be flexible enough that we can use pregnancy diagnosis data, like conventional PD data, and also collar data, and also milk test data or whatever else it is that comes along.
There'll still be a need to use that calving data, I guess, if people are using just milk test or wearables.
Yeah, like this. Yeah, we need the conception data. So so the Fertility technology it has to be able to deliver a dated pregnancy. So what I think is it'll hopefully end up being quite a hybrid of just whatever information we can use to get the earliest conception date for the cow is what we'll use. Okay, did you have more questions, Amelia, or?
Nope, you can keep going.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so this is just a plot to show you how the penalties were applied to each of the, how each of the breeds came up with the penalties, I suppose. So it's the proportion penalised by breed. And so when we apply those new, and particularly the carryover penalty here, this is the proportion of animals that get picked up. So you can see it affects Holstein Friesians most. And then Ayrshires the most, and then Holstein Friesians. And then the other breeds are sort of all sitting around that 14 kind of mark. Right, and then this is just a slide to explain how we did our validation. So we ranked the animals according to their fertility breeding value. So we've got two breeding values we're testing. The first is the pregnancy rate breeding value, and the second is the old calving rate breeding value. And so we rank them best to worst based on a breeding value which has none of their own information in it. So we sort of mask their own information from the evaluation and just let the model predict a breeding value for the animal based on its parents, basically. So we rank them best to worst. We take the top 20% and the bottom 20%, and we expect to see a difference in their performance. And if that difference is bigger, that tells us that the model that we're looking at did a better job of separating out the best and the worst. And that's what we're interested in seeing with these evaluations. We want them to be able to separate the best and the worst, so that when we're selecting the best, they really are better than the others. And so I've just put in this slide, which is one of the metrics we looked at, which was colour for fertility. And so the two rows here are pregnancy rate and conception rate. Calving rate. So this is the new one, and the second row is the old fertility breeding value. And so if we just jump to the last column, that's for the proportion of animals that were culled due to fertility, the separation between the best and the worst. So the difference between the proportion culled of the bottom 20% and the top 20%. When we rank them by the pregnancy rate breeding value, it's 6.2%, and when we rank them by the calving rate breeding value, it's 2.5%. So it's quite a big difference, and it was really great to see that kind of that sort of reflected in the results like that. Gives us a lot of confidence when it came to implementing this trait. And then this slide shows you the average change in the fertility breeding value. So you can see that most animals, on average, all breeds went up, but the Jerseys went up by the most, then crossbreds, then Ayrshires, then Friesians. And then relative rankings of breeds. So on the new fertility breeding value, the rankings are I'm pretty sure this is quite in line with the rankings as they were before as well, but the Jerseys have a lift, and then just the Holstein Friesians, crossbreds kind of in the middle, as you'd expect, and Ayrshires. And then my last slide here is just the genetic trend for fertility. So this is kind of here as a call to action, because it's not very pretty. Fertility is a really important trait for New Zealand, the New Zealand dairy industry in particular. We really rely heavily on the fact that cows get in calf early and then get back in calf quickly. And it's not a trait that we make very good progress in. So these kind of improvements to the breeding value, which help us choose the best from the worst, they're going to help us with the rate of genetic gain and fertility, but there's more work to be done. So it's a trait of focus for us, and we're always looking for ways to improve the accuracy of the fertility breeding value. All right, so that's my last slide. So happy to take any questions. Also, as we go, or we can move on to Hayden stuff if there are none.
I've got no more at the moment, so I think we'll just keep moving with you, Hayden. So, Hayden, do you want to give us a farmer's perspective on the new traits, what you've seen in your herd, and how you think farmers are reacting or will react to the changes that have been made? You're on mute, Hayden.
Thanks, Melissa, for giving us that update. It's even though you work with it all the time, it's still good to get an overview of what we're doing. And that last graph, for me, really showed where we've come from and where we're going. So, as a farmer, I think over the last probably 5 years, we've lost a lot of tools in that fertility toolbox. And probably in the past, hence why there hasn't been a whole lot of concentration on that trait, low heritability, and muddled around that gestation length. So firstly, I think as a farmer, removing that gestation length component has really improved the confidence, I guess, as a farmer to use that trait. I think we understand gestation length a lot better now as well, and how we can use that in our businesses, which is great to have it as a separate trait, and it does have an economic value. But then also for fertility, like I look back, your seeders, heavy use of seeders, inductions, and a lot of those tools are getting harder and harder to come by. So concentrating on fertility is and it's been an industry issue as well. I look back at that graph and it was dropping all the way to 2015, and it hasn't been until that time that it's actually started to improve again. So as an industry, I think we've put a bit of pressure back on it, and that's a good place to be. So, I look at the work we're doing. So as part of our sort of genomic selection in our calves and things, it's part of that criteria now. I look at our herd, so our current milking herd. So it's got a BV of minus 4.8 on average overall. Our rising twos next year coming in minus 3.2, and our rising ones are at minus 1.9, but the genomics on those rising ones are actually 0.7. So within a sort of a 3-year period, we've probably made a move of around 3 to 4 basis points in that BV value. So by not completely focusing on it, but obviously better bulls where the industry is focusing on it, and having it as part of our selection criteria, it's definitely improving it. And even though it's low heritability, we are seeing a pretty rapid improvement in that breeding value. So that's probably from my perspective as a farmer. The concentration we're putting on it is very important, and everyone's going to have their own views on what they're selecting for, but I think bulls coming into teams, I think we're seeing now that they have better fertility than what they did probably 10 years ago. That's for sure.
Thanks, Hayden. So, Melissa and okay, question for you guys. How about the sexed semen? So I guess, how's that affecting fertility? Is it positive, negative? Your thoughts?
Yeah. It's a good question, and it's something that we have flagged where a cow that's mated to sexed semen is less likely to conceive, and it's not her fault necessarily. It's just because of the reality of that product, and so it's something that we don't have at the moment, and that we don't have the record for it. We don't know that the cow was mated to sexed semen coming into Digad, and so to account for it in the future, we need to work with the herd recording companies and capture that information. Yeah, it's something we've been discussing over the last sort of 6 months.
Yeah, it's a tool, isn't it? And it's a really good tool to get more heifer calves. But when you sort of look at the whole picture in terms of feeding back in, good information back into the system, definitely could be having a negative impact. I think that technology is getting better and better all the time, and I think we're learning how to use that technology better as well. And simple systems that on farm that you can use to identify the correct cows for that to be going to, pre-mating heats, two pre-mating heats before they get sex semen, things like that, that you can use on farm is only going to improve that the way those cows conceive. But yeah, definitely is an issue for feeding back into the database for sure.
I think this question kind of works in that area. So in the aim of reducing bobby calves, what do you think is the way to go? Another beef breed as a bull, better selection so you need less heifers, or something completely different? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we went down this route. We've been down this route for 6 years now that we've been no bobbies. Well, I call it no bobbies on farm. We still probably produce between 15 to 25 bobbies a year. So all our heifers are mated to Wagyu, but it requires. So we've got a beef and a Frisian bulls are sold, but it requires two things. So, and the industry is not ready for it yet, but you need infrastructure because all those animals need rearing, and you need a buyer or you need a market. So with the Wagyus, we're on a contract basis, so we're so those are reared through to 95 kilos and sold, but that market's limited. So we're going to have to develop those markets as an industry, as an offshoot to the dairy industry, in order to if that gets market driven or government driven, that legislation, then we're going to have to, as an industry, look at ways that we can achieve that. But firstly, we're going to need more infrastructure, and secondly, we're going to have to develop new markets, and that's that's the job of industry and probably government to do that.
Another question for you in regards to seeder use. Is it being taken into account anywhere, as they have completely different uses, either for non-cyclers or versus a synchro? Melissa?
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of work on this personally because, with my PhD, we went through a whole process trying to account for the use of seeders within our research animals. It's a really tricky one because seeder recording is problematic. We don't receive that into DIGAD and so into animal database, and so we don't have a really reliable record of whether an animal was seeded or not. We can see it in the data because if you look at a plot of mating dates, cows mated by day in a herd, if they're using seeders, there'll be a very obvious spike, on like day 3 or whatever. But you can't penalise all of those cows because some of them did cycle. Some of them were just naturally cycled on that day, that they happened to also be pulling out the seeders that day as well. So it is a really tricky one. And where I came to with my PhD research was can't do a good job of it, so I have to just leave it be. And that's kind of where we're at with the national herd as well. What we would need to resolve that is to be receiving a reliable seeded use data into the national database.
It's interesting, that, and you brought it up through your talk, Melissa, around, and I just want to touch on it around that data entry. Probably people on this call are all very good at doing it, but as an industry, we heard at the Farmer Advisory Panel last week with the next version of BW, when we go to genomics, only 21% of our herd recording data is going to be able to be used for that index because of the poor recording that's currently in place in New Zealand. So, you know, we're our own worst enemy as farmers, and I think we've definitely got a job to do as custodians. We can say that, you know, oh, we're behind the rest of the world and whatnot, but we've got to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, are we actually doing the best with the data we've got? And I think it's a real it's becoming a real issue. And if we want accuracy in these BVs, it's no one else is to blame apart from the farmers putting in that data. And so we have to take an attitude of being custodians of that database and making sure that we're putting our best foot forward when it comes to recording that type of information, whether it be seed use, whether you know, recording calving dates,
mating
details. You know, like Melissa will be able to tell you how many herds in New Zealand have all their cows calve on one day and are all mated on one day, and no DNA. So
we have TOP herds that do that.
Oh yeah. So you know, it's and I mean I'm not probably telling anyone in the school any differently, but you know, when you are talking to your neighbour over the fence and they're saying they're going to stop recording, and you know, there's a really good argument to put in place to say, hey, no, look, we need to put our hands up, and we are the custodians of that information, and if we want to see the benefits of it into the future with our own herds, then it's effectively up to us.
Yeah.
Another question for you. This is kind of going back to that surplus calf thing that Hayden covered. The Irish already have a dairy beef index, carcass weight, growth rate, etc. Is New Zealand behind or working on it? And that's as an outlet for those surplus calves. Melissa?
Yeah, I would say that it's on the books, but it's not near implementation. You know, like it's something that we're talking to the Irish about and following quite closely what they're doing, but we're still quite far away from having that solution in New Zealand. Yeah, and it will require a lot of collaboration with beef and lamb, which I think that they're also very keen to collaborate on. So yeah, there's a few moving parts, but I think that there's pretty good motivation on all sides to get something working.
So another question for you, Hayden, see if you can take this. What can farmers do to help increase their fertility BV? So you talked about record keeping. Is there anything else that you think could benefit?
Yeah, well, I mean, the record keeping one's not going to improve our own BVs, I guess. That's more of an industry wide we're getting better data into the system, so that the powers that be can make better decisions. And you know, when we go down this new route of genomics and things like that we can be really confident that the data is good. I mean, I'll go back to a sort of personal situation, but you know, increasing, and I gave some stats of sort of how we're trying to improve fertility BV, but yeah, like we're just using it as one of our selection criteria for choosing bulls. You know, and I think now with these new changes and going forward, we can have much more confidence that that the BV is right and not influenced by gestation length. So, and definitely, and I mean, I was a skeptic as well. You know, the fertility BV was a little bit all over the show. So, yeah, I think the work that NZAL's done to identify an issue and make a positive change and get it out there to people is a good one. But I mean, there's a whole lot of different things that go into fertility, isn't there? You know, 90% feeding, 10% breeding, all that kind of thing. But yeah, if you're talking about the functionality of a cow as well, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Dennis Aiken Perfect Cow Talk. we were talking about rump angle and rump width and things like that as well. So, it's not just one thing, but there are many things that make it up, and it's up to the farmers what they want to choose, sure. But definitely, I think one thing that we could be doing better is tracking that fertility BV in our herds as well. Every run that we do, we seem to lose the previous data, so we can't sort of track where it's been. So a little bit of a push of mine at the moment to show some of the improvements that we're making in these BVs over time as well, because sometimes looking back and saying, concentrating on those things that's made an improvement is good to see as a farmer as well.
Melissa, have you got any comments on helping to improve your fertility?
No, I mean, Hayden covered that really well. I guess that my comment would be that the key place that you can look to improve your fertility breeding value is sire selection. So just, making it one of the things that's important to you when you're choosing bulls would be my recommendation.
So before we started this, you guys were kind of talking about the bull search function on the Dairy NZ website. Do you just want to quickly go through that a little bit, Melissa, on how you can actually filter for bulls on there for fertility traits and things like that?
Yeah, I could actually just show you that if I bring it up quickly.
The bull search function, from my point of view, is very useful. I use it all the time. So, especially when you're trying to compare overseas bulls with New Zealand bulls. So, because it gives those the numbers in New Zealand terms, which makes it really easy to explain it to people.
Right. Yeah. All right. So, can you see that screen? The bull search tool.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So there's this basic search, which is just by name or AB code. But you can also go to advanced search, and you can search for all the bulls from a certain stud, for example. But what we will be talking about here is setting criteria for fertility or any other trait that's important to you. So this is querying all of the bulls, all 25,000 AE enrolled bulls. So you'll get bulls that are no longer marketed, but you'll just have to work through the list and say, well, these are the CRV bulls, and CRV, do you have these bulls, kind of thing. But you can set the traits to anything, and then just set your criteria, and you could put that like in terms of what to use for a criteria, you could set that as maybe your herd average, because you want everything you breed to be better than your herd average, so you're going forward, or I don't know, the breed average or whatever, however stringent you want to be, really, depending on how important the specific trait is to you.
I think it's a underrated tool. I think, and it was one thing we talked about last week at the Farmer Advisory Panel. How do we increase use of that NZAL database in terms of getting other farmers to use it, rather than potentially just bull catalogues? So you're comparing across one standardized breeding value. I was just giving the example before we jumped on this call. If you put in udder overall in Friesians, udder overall 0.8, I think it was capacity greater than 0.6, and a fertility of better than, I think I had -1 in there. Just the list of bulls pops up, and you can sort of go through and pick and choose for those other traits that you're looking for as well. So, and there might be a minimum breeding worth of, say, 300 or something on there as well. So a very powerful tool that I'd be interested to see the stats, but probably underutilized by our farmers. And at the end of the day, we're all levy payers at Dairy NZ. This is what we pay for. So why aren't we using it?
Yep. Dan's comment was, why can't you search for stature less than something instead of greater than? Just something that Dairy NZ might need to, or NZAL might need to look at, because some people don't like overly talking.
Yeah, totally. And there'll be other traits in there that should be midpoints as well. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. Be done by Monday, Dan. Melissa's onto it. She's written it on her list.
Trim down. Yep.
So another question here: do you account for bull versus chilled semen versus frozen semen? Is that accounted for anywhere?
No, so that falls in the same category as sex semen, where it probably does have an effect on conception, but we don't have that information to account for it.
It is, as a farmer, we are recording, especially sex semen, when we use straw sex semen, it is recorded in our herd recording software. So, I guess, from an industry point of view, to get that better data set, it's been able to pick it up through DIGAD, and it's, that's where evolution, I suppose, has to come from.
Yeah.
So Lee's follow up to that was, so we could improve BV by running a bull in the herd, or not?
I mean, it would all depend on the bull. Is that what you? So I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Lee, if you want to comment again and just clarify your question a bit more, I'll go on. So Dan's got another question here. Will Dairy NZ trust overseas genomics more? We have overseas bulls that excel for fertility, but a huge negative in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So
overseas bulls are challenging. They have always been challenging for animal evaluation in New Zealand. I guess that the good thing on the horizon is genomics. So we're hoping that once we get into 3.5, which will have NZAL 3.5, which will have genomics included, we'll have a much better opportunity to assess the merit of those bulls more accurately, because we'll have a DNA profile from them. The semen importing companies have been very supportive of NZAL 3.5, and I think there's a really good chance that they'll be on board with providing their genotypes. And so we'll have that information, and we'll be able to compare that to our reference population and give a prediction that's based on New Zealand cow performance. So can't be sure of that until we start to see it, but we're pretty optimistic that that's going to help in that space. Like, we know that there's going to be really excellent bulls overseas that could do a lot for New Zealand, but we want to be able to, we need to make sure that we're screening them appropriately and making sure we bring in the right ones. And we're really excited about genomics helping us do
that. So when Lee was talking about could it improve BV by running a bull in the herd, she means just improving fertility.
Okay. So right. So if you ran bulls in your herd, then you wouldn't have to worry about like heat detection and stuff like that. And so I think that farmers who do that do get better conception rates. Well, I mean, it depends how good you were at heat detection before that, I suppose. So in terms of like the actual fertility performance of a herd, you probably could get a lift in conception rates, but at the cost of progress in other traits, probably, because those bulls that you're running in the herd aren't going to be as elite for other traits as the AI bulls would be.
So I don't want to hold everyone up too much longer. It's almost 8 o'clock. But just one more question for you, Melissa. Where to next? So what other breeding values is NZAL looking at updating next?
Yeah, okay. So our absolute focus now is NZAL 3.5, which is bringing genomics into the evaluations. So from now through until December, which is our targeted publish date, is the whole team's working on that, and we are at the stage now of validating those results. They're looking quite good, so we're feeling pretty optimistic about it. But there's a lot of water to go under the bridge when it comes to testing and international review and the such, and we're certainly not going to publish something that we're not confident in. So there's a process to be gone through, but we're hoping to meet that December release date, and that will be across all traits. So it's a really big change for NZAL, which I'm really looking forward to.
That was really exciting last week to hear that plan laid out by NZAL on that 3.5 rollout with full genomics. it's a massive step for the industry here with what we've had, and with that goal of having one piece of information where you can go and compare across all companies, all information, and actually getting that one source of truth again, which we've probably moved away from in the last 4 or 5 years with a number of different indexes and different BVs and things. So I think it's a massive year for NZAL in terms of that space, and I really hope that they can nail it.
Cool. Well, I haven't had any more questions from anybody. So any other last words of wisdom from either of you, Melissa or Hayden?
Okay, thanks.
No, I'm all done with wisdom. Don't have much to give out.
I think you guys have given us a lot of information tonight, and it's all greatly valuable. So thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. I know, Melissa, that you live and breathe this stuff, but it's great that you're so willing to pass on that knowledge as well to other people. And Hayden, you're always willing to help out and help farmers do better wherever they can and share your knowledge as well. So thank you both so much. Everyone that's been on tonight, thank you guys for joining us. We have recorded this session and we will be putting it up on our website. So if you want to go back and double check any of the information that you heard tonight, you're more than welcome to. Just give us a few days to get it up. And we are hoping to do this on a bi-monthly thing going forward. So if you have any topics you want me to cover or anything like that, feel free to flick me a message or an email or anything like that, and we'll try and target them for what you guys want. Thank you all. See you later.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Catch you later.
Cheers.
Right.